Chapter 2. The Prince's Prisoner. Dawn came like a reluctant whisper to Valenhart Castle, its grey light filtering through frost-laced windows to touch stone that had never known warmth. Isolde woke slowly, her dreams dissolving like sugar in rain, leaving only the taste of something half-remembered, half-feared. The chamber was beautiful in daylight, if such weak illumination could be called day. Walls of polished obsidian reflected her movements as she rose, creating shadows that moved independently of her body. The ceiling arched high above, painted with constellations she didn't recognize, stars connected by silvery lines that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them. Her breath clouded the air. Despite the banked fire in the hearth, the room remained cold. A cold that seemed to emanate from the stone itself, from the foundations of this ancient place. Isolde wrapped herself in the heavy robe of midnight blue silk that had been laid at the foot of her bed. Her bare feet made no sound on the marble floor as she crossed to the window, pushing aside heavy velvet curtains, the colour of dried blood. Beyond the glass lay a world transformed. Snow had blanketed the gardens she'd glimpsed last night, turning statues into faceless sentinels and fountains into frozen monuments. Beyond the immediate grounds stretched a forest of black pines, their branches weighed down with ice, and beyond that, mountains, razor-sharp against the pallid sky, impossible to cross. She was truly isolated here, miles from Viremont, from the temple, from anything familiar. A soft knock at the door startled her from her thoughts. "Enter," she called, her voice sounding smaller than she intended. The door opened to reveal Edith, the grey-haired servant who had attended her yesterday. She carried a silver tray bearing a pot of steaming tea, bread, honey, and winter fruits. "Good morning, my lady," Edith said, setting the tray on a small table near the window. "I trust you slept well." "As well as can be expected," Isolde replied. She gestured to the snow beyond the glass. "I didn't realize we'd travelled so far from the city." 3 days' ride in good weather," Edith said, pouring tea into a delicate porcelain cup, "though the prince's carriage is swift. Most make the journey in 5. Isolde accepted the tea, warming her hands around the cup. "Where exactly are we?" "The ancestral seat of House Valenhart," Edith replied. "The castle has stood for 1,000 years. Some say longer." "It feels older," Isolde murmured, more to herself than to the servant. Edith's mouth tightened into a small, humourless smile. "Indeed, some things here are older than memory, even vampire memory." She busied herself around the room, straightening items that needed no straightening, avoiding Isolde's gaze. "When will I see the prince again?" Isolde asked, trying to sound casual. "His Highness left instructions that you are to join him in his study after you've eaten and dressed," Edith replied. "I've laid out suitable attire." She gestured to a gown that hung from a carved wooden screen, deep green velvet, high-necked and long-sleeved, with silver embroidery at cuffs and collar. "That's not mine," Isolde said, frowning. "No, my lady, it belonged to—" Edith stopped herself. "It is provided for you, as is everything you need during your stay here." Isolde noticed the hesitation. "It belonged to whom, Edith?" The servant's eyes darted to the door as if checking for listeners. "To the last bride," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "But that was long ago, and the gown has been cleaned." There was something in the way she said cleaned that made Isolde's skin prickle. "I'll wear my own dress," she said firmly. "As you wish." Edith didn't quite hide her relief. "Though I should warn you, the castle is cold. Always, even in summer." After Isolde had eaten and dressed, in her own simple dress of navy wool, covered with a shawl Edith had provided, the servant led her through a maze of corridors. They passed tapestries depicting hunts and battles, suits of armour that seemed to turn their helmets to watch as she walked by, and windows that looked out on different aspects of the snow-covered grounds. Isolde tried to memorize the route, but each hallway looked much like the last, all shadow and stone and ancient splendor gone slightly to decay. Finally, they stopped before a door of dark wood banded with iron. Edith knocked once, then stepped back. "Enter," came Cassian's voice from within. Edith gave Isolde a small nod, then turned and hurried away, her footsteps fading quickly. Isolde took a deep breath, steadying herself, then pushed open the door. The study beyond was unexpectedly warm, lit by a fire that blazed in a hearth large enough to roast an ox. Bookshelves lined the walls from floor to ceiling, packed with volumes bound in leather and cloth of every colour. A massive desk of polished mahogany dominated the centre of the room, its surface covered with maps, open books, and what appeared to be correspondence. And behind it sat Cassian. He wore a jacket of charcoal grey today, buttoned high at the throat, his dark hair pulled back from his face with a silver clasp. The firelight played across his features, somehow making him look both more human and less, the sharp angles of his face softened by the golden light, but his eyes burning with an inner fire that no mortal could possess. He rose as she entered, a courtesy she hadn't expected. "Lady Isolde," he said, his voice neither warm nor cold, "I trust you found your accommodations acceptable." "The chamber is beautiful," she replied carefully, "if somewhat isolated." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "The West Wing is the safest part of the castle for you. I've ensured that." "Safe from what?" she asked. He gestured to a chair positioned before the desk. "Please, sit." Isolde did so, finding the chair unexpectedly comfortable. Cassian resumed his own seat, studying her with those unnervingly direct eyes. "You have questions," he said. "I expected as much. Ask them." Where to begin? There were so many. She chose the most pressing. "What exactly is my position here? Yesterday you spoke of me as a symbol, but to the court, I'm your bride." "Officially, you are my consort," he replied. "My chosen companion, in the eyes of vampire law, we are bound." "But not as lovers," she clarified. "No." His voice was firm. "Not as lovers." A weight lifted from her chest, relief primarily, though mixed with something more complex that she chose not to examine closely. "Then what are my duties?" she asked. "What am I expected to do?" "For now, learn," he said. "This castle, its history, the customs of the highborn, the politics of the court. You will need this knowledge to survive here." "You make it sound as if I'm in danger." His expression darkened. "You are. Every moment. The binding protects you from certain threats, but not all." "What threats?" He sighed, a surprisingly human gesture. "Vampire politics are complex. My father's court is a nest of vipers. Many will see you as a way to reach me, through manipulation, through harm, through your blood." "My blood?" she repeated, a chill running through her. "The binding has made your blood unique," he explained. "It now carries an essence of my power. To drink from you would be significant for any vampire." Understanding dawned. "That's why you won't feed from me." His gaze sharpened. "I told you last night. I have no intention of using you for blood or pleasure." "Yes, but you didn't explain why. Is it because it would give you too much power, or because it would give me power over you?" For the first time, he looked genuinely surprised. Then his expression closed again. "Clever," he murmured, "but only partially correct. The truth is more complicated, and not something you need concern yourself with." He rose abruptly, moving to the window. With his back to her, he continued, "You will have freedom to move about the West Wing as you please. My servants have been instructed to provide whatever you require. Books, clothing, company, if you wish it." "But I cannot leave the wing," she said. It wasn't a question. "No." He turned back to her. "The wards will prevent it, for your own safety." "So, I am a prisoner." His jaw tightened. "You are protected. Without my consent." "Your consent was given at the binding," he said coldly. But if you prefer to think of yourself as a prisoner, I cannot stop you. The reality remains the same." Isolde stood, anger flaring. "And what reality is that? That I've been taken from everything I know, bound to a vampire prince for reasons he refuses to explain fully, and locked in a wing of a castle in the middle of nowhere?" "Yes," he said simply. "That is precisely the reality. And it will not change, no matter how you rail against it." They stared at each other, the tension between them almost palpable. Finally, Isolde looked away. "How long?" she asked, her voice smaller now. "How long must I remain here?" "Until it is safe for you to leave," he replied. "Or until our arrangement reaches its natural conclusion. Which means, as I told you yesterday, a year, perhaps, no longer." A year. The word echoed in her mind. A year of this cold castle, of isolation, of being bound to this enigmatic, frustrating man. "Very well," she said, lifting her chin. "Since I appear to have no choice in the matter, I will make the best of it. But I want something in return." His eyebrow arched. "You are in no position to negotiate, Lady Isolde." "Perhaps not, but you claim to need my cooperation. My performance as your devoted bride. That has value, does it not?" A flicker of something, respect perhaps, crossed his face. "What do you want?" "Books, access to the library, not just any books, histories of your kind, of this place, of the binding ritual. I want to understand what I've been drawn into." He considered her request, his expression unreadable. "The library is yours," he said finally, "though some volumes will remain restricted. And one more thing," she said, pushing her advantage. "I want honesty. When I ask you a direct question, I want a direct answer. No half-truths, no evasions." Now he actually smiled, a cold, sharp thing that didn't reach his eyes. "You ask too much. There are truths that would not serve you to know. Then say so. Say, I cannot answer that. But don't lie to me. I deserve that much." He studied her for a long moment, those garnet eyes seeming to see through her, into places she kept hidden even from herself. "Very well," he said finally. "I will not lie to you, but know this. There are questions you should not ask. Not because I will not answer, but because the answers may destroy what little peace you might find here." With that cryptic warning, he moved to the door. "Come, I will show you the library myself." Isolde followed him into the corridor, her mind racing. She had won a small victory, but at what cost? What truths lurked in this ancient place that even a vampire prince feared to speak them? The library of Valenhart Castle was a cathedral of knowledge, its vaulted ceiling lost in shadow, its shelves stretching in every direction like the ribs of some literary leviathan. Dust motes danced in the pale light that filtered through tall, narrow windows. The air smelled of leather, parchment, and time. "Most of these volumes are unique," Cassian said as they walked between the towering shelves. "Collected over centuries, preserved when their like were destroyed elsewhere." Isolde trailed her fingers along leather spines embossed with titles in languages she didn't recognize. "How many languages do you speak?" she asked. 13 fluently, he replied. "Another 7 with varying degrees of competence." "How old are you?" The question slipped out before she could consider its propriety. He glanced back at her, amusement flickering in his eyes. 423 years, still relatively young by high-born standards. Isolde tried to comprehend such a span of time. 4 centuries of memories, of experiences, of watching the world change around him while he remained unchanging. "And you've never taken a bride before," she said. "Why now?" His shoulders stiffened. "That is one of those questions best left unasked." "Is it because of the curse you mentioned? The one that didn't reject me?" He stopped walking, his back to her. For a moment she thought he might refuse to respond. Then, without turning, he said, "Yes and no. The timing is not of my choosing." but the selection was. "What curse?" she pressed. "What does it do?" Now he did turn, his expression darkening. "It kills," he said flatly. "It has killed every bride chosen by a Valenhart prince for 300 years. Save one." "Who?" "My mother." He turned away again. "This section contains histories of our kind. You'll find what you seek here. I have matters to attend to." Before she could ask another question, he was gone, moving with that preternatural speed that reminded her what he truly was. Not a man, for all his human appearance, but something ancient and dangerous. Isolde stood alone among the books, shivering despite the heavy shawl around her shoulders. A curse that killed brides, a binding ritual that connected them through blood. And somewhere in this labyrinthine castle, secrets that might explain why she had been chosen, why the veil had claimed her, why Cassian had selected her, and why, of all the brides before her, she might be spared the curse's fatal touch. She began pulling books from the shelves, determined to find answers where Cassian would not provide them. Days passed with a strange, dreamlike quality. Isolde spent hours in the library poring over histories and mythologies, searching for mentions of the binding ritual or the curse Cassian had referenced. She found fragments, a paragraph here, a footnote there, but nothing comprehensive. What she did learn was unsettling. The binding between vampire and mortal was ancient, predating even the great war that had established vampire rule. It was meant to create a perfect symbiosis, the vampire gaining increased power through the mortal's life essence, the mortal gaining longevity and protection through the vampire's immortal strength. But nowhere did she find an explanation for why Cassian refused to complete the bond by drinking her blood. When not in the library, Isolde explored the West Wing, mapping its corridors and chambers in her mind. She discovered rooms that seemed untouched for decades. A music room with instruments gathering dust, a solar with dried flowers still arranged in vases, a nursery with toys frozen in time. And everywhere, portraits. Women with the same haunted eyes, the same formal poses. Some wore the red veil still. Others were depicted after the binding, a silver mark visible on their palms, just like the one Isolde now bore. None of the portraits showed the subjects smiling. In her wanderings, Isolde occasionally encountered servants, human, all of them, with the same wary look in their eyes. They bowed or curtsied when they saw her, but none would meet her gaze directly. None would engage in conversation beyond the most perfunctory exchanges. It was as if they feared her, or feared what she represented. On the 5th day, she attempted to leave the West Wing. She had mapped what she believed to be the boundary, a grand archway decorated with stone roses, beyond which lay corridors she had not yet explored. As she approached the archway, the air thickened around her. Her steps became leaden. A soft hum just at the edge of hearing began to vibrate through her bones. She pressed forward determined. The hum became a roar. The air solidified, becoming a wall of invisible force that pushed against her. Her lungs compressed. Her vision darkened at the edges. One more step, and she was thrown backward, landing hard on the marble floor, gasping for breath. A ward just as Cassian had warned. Powerful magic that recognized her, that knew she did not have permission to pass. She was still lying there trying to catch her breath when a shadow fell across her. "I did warn you," Cassian said, looking down at her with an expression caught between concern and irritation. "I had to try," she gasped. To her surprise, he offered his hand. After a moment's hesitation, she took it, allowing him to pull her effortlessly to her feet. "The wards are not meant to harm you," he said, "but they will prevent passage, no matter how determined you may be." "Like a beautiful cage," she said bitterly. His mouth tightened. "If you prefer that metaphor." They stood in silence for a moment, her hand still in his. His skin was cool but not cold, smooth as polished stone. She could feel strength in that hand, strength held carefully in check. She withdrew her touch first. "Why do the servants fear me?" she asked abruptly. Cassian frowned. They fear what they do not understand. And you, Lady Isolde, are an unknown quantity in a house that has known only certainty for centuries. They look at me as if I'm already dead, his expression darkened. Pay them no mind. Their superstitions are their own concern. But it's not superstition, is it? She pressed. The curse you mentioned, the one that kills brides, it's real. They're waiting for it to take me as it took the others. He stared at her, his face unreadable. Then, with a small sigh, he said, "Walk with me." They moved through the corridors side by side, silent until they reached a small courtyard open to the sky. Snow had been cleared from the stone benches, though ice still rimed the edges of a fountain that no longer flowed. "The curse is real," Cassian said, once they were seated. "As real as the binding that connects us. But it is selective. Meaning, it kills those who are bound to a Valenhart prince if certain conditions are met. Conditions that, thus far, have been met by every bride save one." "Your mother," Isolde said, remembering their earlier conversation. He nodded. "My mother survived the binding, lived a full life, or as full as a mortal can have, bound to our kind." What made her different? Cassian stared into the middle distance, his profile sharp against the snowy backdrop. "Love," he said finally, the word seeming to cost him. "The curse kills where there is no love, where the binding is based on politics, on power, on bloodthirst. But where there is genuine feeling," he trailed off. "The bride lives," Isolde finished for him. "Perhaps," he looked at her directly. "It's a theory. One my father rejects," understanding dawned. "That's why you won't feed from me. Why you keep your distance. You think the curse will spare me if there is no intimacy between us. I think," he said carefully, "that the less entangled we become, the safer you will be. And when our arrangement has served its purpose, you can leave here alive. Unlike those who came before." The truth of it settled over her like snow, cold, inexorable. She was caught in a deadly game, a pawn moved on a board she could barely comprehend, and Cassian, for all his coldness, was trying in his way to protect her. "Thank you," she said quietly, "for your honesty." He looked faintly surprised. "You're welcome." They sat in silence for a time, watching the slow dance of snow falling beyond the courtyard's sheltered confines. "You play beautifully," Cassian said suddenly. Isolde blinked. "What?" "The piano. In the old music room. I've heard you." Heat rose to her cheeks. "You've been listening." The sound carries. A pause. "It's been a long time since these walls heard music." She studied him. The perfect stillness of his posture, the weight of centuries in his eyes, despite his youthful appearance. "Would you like me to play for you?" she offered, surprising herself. "Properly, I mean. Not just—" She gestured vaguely. Something shifted in his expression, a softening around the eyes, perhaps. "I would like that," he said. "Very much." The music room was dusty with disuse, but the grand piano at its centre remained in perfect tune. Maintained, perhaps, by magic. Tall windows lined one wall, their diamond-patterned glass casting prismatic light across the floor as the afternoon sun, weak as it was, broke through the clouds. Isolde seated herself at the bench, running her fingers lightly over the ivory keys. Cassian stood by the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the pale light. "Any requests?" she asked. "Play what moves you," he replied. She began with something simple, a folk melody she'd learned at the temple, its cadence reminiscent of falling rain. Her fingers remembered the patterns, muscle memory taking over where conscious thought faltered. The music filled the room, each note hanging in the air like frost crystals, delicate, ephemeral, beautiful in their transience. As she played, she felt the tension in her shoulders ease. For the first time since the binding, she felt, not free, precisely, but less constrained. The music was hers. No one could bind it or control it. She glanced up to find Cassian watching her, his expression unguarded for once. What she saw there startled her. Hunger, yes, but not the predatory hunger she'd expected. Something deeper, lonelier. Their eyes met, and for a moment something passed between them, an understanding that transcended words, that existed in the space between notes. Then his expression closed again, the mask of the prince slipping back into place. "You have talent," he said formally. "Thank you for sharing it." Before she could respond, he was gone. A shadow passing through the doorway, leaving only the fading echo of her music. Isolde sat at the piano long after he left, her hands still on the keys. What had she seen in his eyes? And why did it leave her feeling both unsettled and, strangely, seen? She played again that evening, after darkness had fallen. Alone in the music room lit only by a single candle, she let her hands wander over the keys, creating music that reflected her confusion, her fear, her strange new existence. And though she saw no one, heard no movement, she knew he was listening. Somewhere in the shadows, Cassian stood guard. Over her, or against her, she could not tell. It was well past midnight when she finally returned to her chamber, exhausted but somehow lighter than she had been in days. As she prepared for bed, a movement at the window caught her eye. There, perched on the outer sill, was a bat, its wings folded against its small body, its eyes reflecting the candlelight, like tiny rubies. Isolde approached cautiously. Bats were common enough in Vermont, but here, in the dead of winter, miles from anywhere? It seemed improbable. As she neared the window, she saw something attached to the creature's leg. A tiny scroll of parchment, no larger than her smallest finger. Curiosity overcoming caution, she unlatched the window. Cold air rushed in as she opened it just enough to reach the bat. It remained perfectly still as she untied the scroll, then launched itself into the night the moment it was freed from its burden. Isolde closed the window quickly, shivering in the sudden chill. She unrolled the tiny scroll with trembling fingers. Written in a flowing, elegant hand were 5 words. You were never meant for him. No signature, no explanation, just that cryptic, unsettling message. Isolde stared at the parchment, her blood running cold. Who would send such a message? Who even knew she was here besides the court that had witnessed the binding? She moved to the fire, intending to burn the note, then stopped. If someone was trying to communicate with her, someone who might have answers she sought, destroying the evidence seemed unwise. Instead, she tucked the parchment into a small box where she kept the few personal items she'd brought from the temple: a mother-of-pearl comb, a small book of prayers, a pressed flower from the garden she'd tended there. As she closed the box, a strange sensation prickled at the back of her neck, the feeling of being watched. She turned quickly, surveying the room. Nothing. No one. Just shadows and silence. And yet the feeling persisted, a sense that somewhere in the vast, ancient castle, eyes were upon her, watching, waiting, measuring her against some standard she couldn't comprehend. Isolde slipped into bed, drawing the covers up to her chin despite the fire that still burned in the hearth. Outside, the wind had risen, moaning through the towers and battlements like a soul in torment. You were never meant for him. The words echoed in her mind as she drifted into uneasy sleep. And in her dreams, she stood in a hall of mirrors, each reflecting not her face but the faces of the women in the portraits, the brides who had come before. Their eyes followed her as she moved, their lips forming words she couldn't hear. Until one stepped through the glass, her form translucent as mist, and whispered, "Run while you still can, before the binding takes your soul as it took ours." Isolde woke with a strangled cry, sweat dampening her nightgown despite the chamber's chill. The fire had died to embers. The moon had set. In the darkest hour of night, she sat trembling in her bed, surrounded by stone walls that had witnessed centuries of secrets, of bindings, of deaths. And she understood with sudden terrible clarity that whatever game Cassian was playing, whatever purpose she served in his plans, there were other forces at work in Valenhart Castle. Forces that saw her not as a pawn, but as a sacrifice to a curse that had claimed every bride before her, every bride save one. Chapter 3. Court of Fangs. 3 weeks after the binding ceremony, a formal summons arrived. Written on parchment edged with gold, sealed with blood-red wax bearing the royal crest, it was delivered by a servant who bowed so low his forehead nearly touched the floor. Isolde broke the seal, unfolding the parchment with fingers that trembled slightly. By decree of his eternal majesty, King Renatus Valenhart, first of the Crimson Line, master of the Night Domains, the Lady Isolde Marin, chosen of Prince Cassian, is commanded to present herself at the Winter Court. The royal carriage will arrive at dusk. No date, no explanation. Just a command that could not be refused. She found Cassian in the library, his tall figure silhouetted against a window that looked out on endless snow. He didn't turn as she entered, though she knew he'd heard her approach. "I've received a summons," she said, holding out the parchment. "I know." Still, he didn't look at her. "I received one as well." "The Winter Court?" she asked. "What is it?" "A tradition," he replied. "A gathering of all noble houses at the royal palace. 3 days of politics disguised as celebration." "And I'm expected to attend?" The thought of facing a court full of vampires made her stomach tighten with dread. Now he did turn, his garnet eyes unreadable in the library's dim light. "You are my consort. Your presence is not optional." "I see." She hesitated, then asked the question that had been gnawing at her since the bat's message 3 nights ago. "Cassian, was there another before me?" His expression hardened. "What do you mean?" "Another bride. Someone you chose before me." For a heartbeat she thought he might tell her the truth. Then his face closed, becoming the impenetrable mask she'd come to know. "No," he said, "there was no one." The mark on her palm tingled, not quite pain, but a sensation that drew her attention. Was it responding to his words, to the lie she suspected they contained? Then why— "Enough questions," he cut her off. "You need to prepare. The court will scrutinize every aspect of you, your appearance, your manners, your words. One misstep could be problematic. For you or for me." His mouth tightened. "For both of us." He crossed to a bookshelf, removing a slim volume bound in midnight blue leather. "Read this," he said, handing it to her. "It contains the protocols of court behavior. Memorize them. Your life may depend on it." She accepted the book, noting its title embossed in silver. The Court Immortal, Customs and Ceremonies. "Will you—" She paused, uncertain how to phrase what she wanted to ask. "Will you be there? With me?" Something flickered in his eyes, an emotion she couldn't name. "I will present you to the court," he said. "After that, we will be expected to socialize separately. It is customary." "I see," she said, though she didn't, not really. Why bring her to court only to abandon her among predators? "Edith will help you prepare," he continued. "A suitable gown has been arranged." "Not another bride's, I hope," she said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. His eyes narrowed. "No, it was made for you." With that, he turned back to the window, dismissing her as effectively as if he'd ordered her to leave. Isolde clutched the book to her chest, fighting a wave of uncertainty. In 3 weeks, she'd barely begun to understand the complexities of vampire society, the ancient rivalries, the blood-bound alliances, the deadly etiquette that governed their immortal lives. And now she was expected to navigate a royal court, surrounded by creatures who saw her as food, or a curiosity, or, worst of all, a weakness in Cassian's armor. As she left the library, the book heavy in her hands, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being sent into battle without armor or weapons. And that Cassian, for all his talk of protection, was deliberately placing her in harm's way. The royal carriage arrived precisely at dusk, as promised. A massive conveyance of black lacquer and silver, pulled by 6 horses the colour of smoke. Their breath steamed in the winter air, but their eyes glowed with an inner fire that no mortal beast could possess. Isolde descended the steps of Valenhart Castle, wrapped in a cloak of midnight velvet lined with silver fox fur. Beneath it, she wore the gown that had been delivered that morning, a creation of deepest crimson silk that clung to her form before falling in a cascade to pool at her feet. The bodice was embroidered with silver thread in patterns that resembled thorns or perhaps veins, and the sleeves ended at her wrists in points that draped over her hands. Around her throat she wore a single strand of garnets set in silver, a gift left anonymously on her dressing table, though she suspected Cassian was the donor. Her dark hair had been arranged in an intricate style, half up, secured with silver pins, half down in waves that cascaded past her shoulders. She looked, she had to admit, like a vampire's consort, elegant, otherworldly, and slightly dangerous. Cassian awaited her at the bottom of the steps, dressed in formal attire that emphasized his inhuman beauty. A jacket of black velvet embroidered with silver at collar and cuffs, trousers of the same midnight fabric, and boots that gleamed like obsidian. A chain of silver links hung across his chest, each link set with a small blood-red stone. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, the only indication that her appearance had made any impression. "You look appropriate," he said, offering his arm. Isolde bit back a retort, accepting his arm with as much grace as she could muster. "Thank you," she said coolly. "As do you." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "A diplomat already. Perhaps you'll survive the court after all." The interior of the carriage was plush with velvet seats and lined with mirrors that reflected nothing. Not her, not Cassian, not even the lamps that cast golden light throughout the space. Magic, she presumed, though its purpose eluded her. As the carriage began to move, drawn by those unnatural horses at a speed that made the world outside blur, Isolde studied Cassian's reflection in the window, his perfect stillness, his timeless features, the weight of centuries in his eyes. "What should I expect?" she asked, breaking the silence that had fallen between them. He turned from his contemplation of the passing landscape. "Scrutiny," he said. "Judgment. Perhaps hostility." "From whom, specifically?" His expression tightened. "My father's court is factional. Those loyal to the crown, those who wish to see change, those who simply enjoy chaos for its own sake." "And where do you stand in these factions?" His eyes met hers directly. "Exactly where I need to stand to achieve my ends." "Which are?" "Not something you need concern yourself with." Isolde felt frustration rising. Always he evaded the questions that mattered most. "I'm walking into a nest of immortal predators," she said, unable to keep the edge from her voice. "I think I deserve to know what political cross-currents I might drown in." To her surprise, he inclined his head slightly, an acknowledgement of her point. "Fair enough," he said. "You should be wary of Duchess Myrith. She has coveted a place in my father's inner circle for centuries. She will see you as a way to curry favour with him, or to undermine me." "And Lord Everic?" Cassian's expression darkened. "How do you know that name?" "The book you gave me," she said. "It mentions him as a power at court." It wasn't entirely a lie. The book did mention Everic, though only in passing. But something in the way Cassian had spoken of those who simply enjoy chaos had suggested a specific individual. A gamble, but one that paid off. "Everic is dangerous," Cassian said after a moment. "Not because he has political ambitions, but because he has none. He serves only his own amusement. And he finds mortal suffering particularly amusing." "I'll avoid him then." "You won't be able to," Cassian said grimly. "He'll seek you out precisely because you're mine." The possessive word sent an unexpected shiver through her, not entirely unpleasant. "And what am I to do when these dangerous immortals approach me?" she asked. when I'm alone among them, as you said I would be. Be respectful but not servile, he replied. Show neither fear nor defiance. Answer questions directly, but reveal nothing of importance. And what is of importance? Anything concerning me, he said. Or us. Our arrangement. She could have laughed, had the situation not been so dire. So I'm to make pleasant conversation while revealing nothing about the only person I know at court, nor about my reason for being there? Now he did smile, a cold, sharp thing. Welcome to immortal politics, Lady Isolde. The rest of the journey passed in silence, each lost in private thoughts as the carriage sped through the night toward a court of fangs and shadows. The royal palace of King Renatus rose like a mountain of black glass against the night sky, its spires piercing the low, hanging clouds, its windows glowing with an eerie blue-white light that seemed to emanate from within the stone itself. It sprawled across the top of a sheer cliff, accessible only by a narrow causeway that wound treacherously upward from the forest below. As the carriage ascended this precarious path, Isolde caught glimpses of the drop on either side, a fall that would mean certain death, the rocky canyon floor hundreds of feet below, shrouded in mist that glowed faintly with what might have been phosphorescence or magic. Impressive, isn't it? Cassian said, noting her wide-eyed gaze. The palace was built on the ruins of a fortress that stood here before humans walked upright. Some say the foundations extend all the way to the center of the earth. It's beautiful, Isolde admitted, in a terrifying way. Most beautiful things are terrifying, he replied, when you truly see them. His eyes met hers as he spoke, and for a moment she felt as if he was looking through her, past the carefully constructed facade of the consort she was pretending to be, to the frightened, confused woman beneath. Then the carriage stopped, and the moment passed. A footman, vampire, judging by his pale beauty and the unnatural grace with which he moved, opened the door. Cassian exited first, then turned to offer his hand to Isolde. As she stepped down, the full impact of the palace hit her. Up close, it was even more imposing, a massive structure of black stone veined with silver. Its entrance a yawning archway flanked by statues of bat-winged figures with expressions of terrible ecstasy on their stone faces. Cassian placed her hand on his arm, and together they ascended the steps to the entrance. Guards in armor of obsidian and silver stood at attention, their faces impassive, their eyes glowing faintly in the shadows of their helmets. They passed through the archway into a vestibule where servants waited to take their cloaks. As Isolde handed over her velvet wrap, she felt suddenly exposed, the crimson gown leaving her shoulders bare, the garnet necklace drawing attention to the vulnerability of her throat. The great hall beyond took her breath away. Vaulted ceilings soared overhead, supported by columns carved to resemble ancient trees, their stone branches intertwining to form a canopy from which hung chandeliers of crystal and bone. The floor was polished obsidian, so perfectly reflective that it created the illusion of walking on a black mirror. And everywhere, on balconies, in alcoves, gathered in conversational groups across the vast space, were vampires, hundreds of them, perhaps thousands, more than Isolde had ever seen in one place, all beautiful, all deadly, all watching as she entered on Cassian's arm. A hush fell over the assembly, even the music, provided by an orchestra of pale, ethereal figures on a raised platform, quieted. At the far end of the hall, on a dais of silver-veined marble, stood 3 thrones. The central one, largest and most ornate, was occupied by King Renatus. To his right sat a woman of such exquisite beauty that Isolde's heart ached to look at her. Hair like moonlight, skin like pearl, eyes like midwinter ice. The queen, presumably, though Isolde had not known Renatus had a consort. The third throne, to the king's left, was empty, waiting, she realized, for Cassian, the crown prince. "Remember," Cassian murmured as they began the long walk across the mirrored floor, You are bound to a prince of the blood. You bow to no one but the king and queen." Isolde nodded slightly, her heart thundering in her chest. Every eye in the hall was upon them, some curious, some hostile, all hungry in one way or another. When they reached the dais, Cassian bowed with perfect grace, deep enough to show respect, not so deep as to suggest subservience. Isolde followed his example, sinking into a curtsy that she held until the king spoke. "Rise," came Renatus's voice, cold and clear as a mountain stream. "Let us look upon the mortal who has captured our son's interest." Isolde straightened, meeting the king's gaze directly as protocol demanded. His eyes were black as the void between stars, ancient beyond comprehension, and utterly without warmth. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice steadier than she felt, "I am honoured by your welcome." "Are you?" the king mused. "I wonder. Tell me, Lady Isolde, does my son treat you well? Or does he keep you locked away like all his other treasures?" A ripple of laughter spread through the court at this barb. Beside her, Cassian stiffened almost imperceptibly. "His Highness has shown me every courtesy," Isolde replied carefully, "and taught me much of your world that I would not otherwise have known." "Indeed?" The king smiled, a sharp, humourless expression. "And what has he taught you of court politics, I wonder? Or of the true nature of our kind?" Before Isolde could formulate a response, the queen leaned forward, her gaze sweeping over Isolde with cool assessment. "She is lovelier than I expected," she said, her voice like silk over steel, though perhaps a bit fragile for our son's tastes. Again that ripple of laughter, more pronounced this time. Cassian's hand tightened on hers almost painfully. A warning. "Beauty fades, mother," he said smoothly. "I prefer substance to decoration." The queen's perfect features hardened slightly at the implied criticism. "How fortunate, then, that your bride possesses both." It was not the compliment it appeared to be. Isolde understood the subtext well enough. The queen was publicly acknowledging her as Cassian's bride, a permanent arrangement, not the temporary consort he had described to her privately. The king waved a hand dismissively. "Enough pleasantries. The court awaits. Go, mingle. Let our son's choice be known to all." With those words, they were dismissed. Cassian led Isolde away from the dais, back into the crowd that parted before them like water around stone. "Well handled," he murmured, for her ears alone. "But be wary. My father rarely asks questions without purpose." "And what was his purpose?" she asked quietly. "To determine where your loyalties lie," Cassian replied, "and to remind me of my place." Before she could ask what he meant, they were approached by a group of vampires, nobles judging by their finery and the deference with which others moved out of their path. At their head was a woman of striking beauty, tall, statuesque, with hair like spun gold and lips painted black against skin the colour of moonlight. Her gown of midnight blue silk exposed more than it concealed, and jewels that sparked with inner fire adorned her throat and wrists. "Prince Cassian," she purred, executing a curtsy that managed to be both technically perfect and subtly mocking. "How gracious of you to join us after so long an absence, and with such unexpected company." This, then, was Duchess Meredith, the woman Cassian had warned her about. Isolde felt the Duchess's gaze on her like a physical touch, assessing, calculating, dismissing. "Duchess," Cassian acknowledged, his tone neutral, "may I present Lady Isolde Marin, my consort?" "Charmed," Meredith said, the word dripping with insincerity. She turned to Isolde, her smile never reaching her eyes. "Tell me, my dear, how does a girl of no name and less fortune find herself bound to the heir of House Valenhart? It's quite the fairy tale." The insult was clear, but Isolde had been prepared for this. She had spent days studying the protocols of court behaviour, including the art of the veiled riposte. Perhaps His Highness recognized qualities beyond the obvious, she replied, her voice sweet. A discerning eye sees value where others see only surface. Meredith's smile tightened. How quaint. And what qualities might those be? You're hardly the most beautiful mortal at court, nor, I suspect, the most accomplished. Beauty and accomplishment are common enough, Isolde countered. Loyalty, discretion, and courage are rarer commodities. And you possess these rare qualities? Meredith asked, her tone arch. She possesses qualities I value, Cassian interjected before Isolde could respond. That is sufficient. Meredith's eyes narrowed at the rebuke. Of course, she said smoothly. Though I wonder if your father shares your assessment. My father's opinions are his own, Cassian replied coolly, as are mine. Tension crackled between them, centuries of animosity distilled into a few polite exchanges. Isolde could almost taste the hostility in the air. Then another voice broke in. Male, rich with amusement. Such formality. One might think we were at a funeral rather than a celebration. A tall vampire with russet hair and eyes the colour of amber stepped into their circle. He was strikingly handsome, with a face that seemed made for mischief. High cheekbones, a generous mouth, and eyes that sparkled with barely contained laughter. Lord Everick, Cassian acknowledged, his tone noticeably cooler. I didn't realise you were in attendance. And miss the debut of your mysterious bride, Everick replied, grinning. I would sooner miss my own beheading. He turned to Isolde, executing a bow of such exaggerated courtliness that it bordered on mockery. Lady Isolde, he said, taking her free hand and bringing it to his lips, a pleasure beyond words. His touch was cool like all vampires, but there was something else, a subtle current of energy that made her palm tingle where the binding mark was. She withdrew her hand as quickly as politeness allowed. Lord Everick, she acknowledged, careful to keep her tone neutral. The pleasure is mine. His grin widened, as if her discomfort delighted him. I must say, Cassian, you've surprised us all. Centuries of refusing to participate in the blood festival, and then suddenly... He gestured to Isolde. A choice most unexpected. I'm full of surprises, Cassian replied, his voice like ice. Indeed you are, Everick agreed. His amber eyes settled on Isolde with unsettling intensity. I do hope, Lady Isolde, that you'll honour me with a dance this evening. I so rarely have the opportunity to converse with mortals of quality. Before Cassian could refuse on her behalf, as he clearly intended to, Isolde replied, Perhaps later, my lord. For now, I'm still becoming acquainted with the court. Everick's eyebrows rose slightly, as if surprised by her diplomatic handling of his request. Later, then, he said. I shall count the minutes. With a final bow to Isolde and a nod to Cassian that held more challenge than respect, he melted back into the crowd. Meredith watched him go with obvious distaste. I see Everick hasn't changed, she remarked. Still collecting mortals like trinkets. And you still collect gossip like poison, Cassian retorted. The Duchess laughed, a sound like glass breaking. Poison has its uses, my prince, as does gossip. She turned to Isolde, her smile sharp as a blade. A word of advice, little bride. Watch your back in this court, and your neck. Not all fangs announce themselves before they strike. With that parting shot, she swept away, her entourage following in her wake like shadows. Charming, Isolde murmured once they were out of earshot. Meredith is many things, Cassian replied. Charming isn't one of them, but she's dangerous, perhaps the most dangerous vampire at court, precisely because she appears to be nothing more than a social climber. And Everick? Cassian's expression darkened. Everick is a problem for another time. For now, remember what I told you. We will be expected to separate. Are you prepared? Isolde nodded, though her heart raced at the thought of navigating this deadly court alone. I've studied the protocols. I know how to behave. Knowing and doing are different matters, he said. Then, unexpectedly, he took her hand, his touch gentler than it had been all evening. Be careful, Isolde. The court sees you as my weakness. They will test that theory. Am I? She asked, the question slipping out before she could consider its wisdom. Your weakness. His eyes met hers, garnet depths revealing nothing. Everyone has weaknesses, he said finally. The trick is to ensure no one discovers what they truly are. With those enigmatic words, he released her hand and stepped back. I must attend my father. Mingle, but avoid private conversations. Stay in public spaces. And remember, you are bound to a prince. Act accordingly. Then he was gone, moving through the crowd with the fluid grace of his kind, leaving Isolde alone in a sea of predators. The winter court was a battlefield disguised as a ballroom, and Isolde was a soldier with neither map nor weapon. She moved carefully through the crowd, accepting introductions, responding to inquiries with polite but non-committal answers, always aware that every word she spoke would be dissected, analysed, and potentially used against her, or against Cassian. The vampires watched her with varying degrees of curiosity, contempt, and hunger. Some were openly hostile, turning away when she approached. Others were overly familiar, asking questions that sailed perilously close to impertinence. A few seemed genuinely interested in her, though whether from political calculation or actual curiosity she couldn't tell. Through it all, she maintained the facade of calm confidence that Cassian had instructed her to project, though beneath the surface, her nerves were stretched to breaking. She caught glimpses of him occasionally, standing near the king, engaged in conversation with nobles she didn't recognize, watching from balconies with those unreadable garnet eyes. But he made no move to return to her side, and she understood this was another test, both of her ability to navigate court politics and of their supposed bond. It was during one of these moments of observation that she spotted another mortal. A young woman, perhaps a few years younger than herself, with hair the colour of autumn leaves and eyes wide with barely concealed fear. She wore a gown of pale blue silk and a silver collar that marked her as a bound consort, just like Isolde. But unlike Isolde, this girl was trembling, tears tracking silently down her cheeks as a vampire lord, middle-aged in appearance though likely centuries old, gripped her arm with visible force. He was speaking to her in low, intense tones, his face contorted with anger or perhaps hunger. Without conscious thought, Isolde began moving toward them. The crowd seemed to part before her, or perhaps it was simply that her focus had narrowed to that single point of distress. As she drew closer, she caught fragments of the Lord's tirade. Embarrass me in front of the court, refuse me when I... The girl shook her head, her voice too low for Isolde to hear, but her posture one of abject misery. Your duty, your only purpose. The Lord yanked the girl's collar, exposing her throat. With a sudden vicious movement, he bent toward her, fangs extending. My lord, Isolde said, her voice carrying with unexpected authority. Forgive my intrusion, but I believe we haven't been introduced. The vampire straightened, his expression shifting from rage to surprise to careful neutrality in the space of a heartbeat. The girl remained frozen, her gaze fixed on the floor. Lady Isolde, the Lord said, recovering quickly, Prince Cassian's new acquisition. I am Lord Harrow of House Blackthorn. A pleasure, Isolde lied smoothly. She turned to the girl. And you are? The girl looked up, startled at being addressed directly. Lady Eleanor, she whispered, of House Blackthorn. My consort, Lord Harrow added, his tone proprietary, and currently in disgrace for refusing her duties. I see, Isolde said, though what she saw was a predator abusing his power over someone unable to defend herself. Perhaps Lady Eleanor would benefit from a moment's respite. The court can be overwhelming for those unaccustomed to its intensity. Lord Harrow's eyes narrowed. Lady Eleanor's comfort is my concern, not yours. Of course, Isolde agreed. But as consorts to powerful lords, perhaps we might share experiences. I find I have much to learn about my new role, and Lady Eleanor seems knowledgeable. It was a thin pretext, but it served its purpose. The public humiliation of his consort was one thing. Refusing a reasonable request from Prince Cassian's bound bride was another. Court politics demanded a certain level of courtesy, even between rivals. "Very well," Lord Harrow conceded, though his expression suggested he was far from pleased. "A brief conversation, but remember your place, wife." The last word was directed at Eleanor with enough venom to make the girl flinch. Isolde offered her arm to Eleanor, who took it with visible relief. Together, they moved away from Lord Harrow, finding a relatively quiet alcove near one of the massive windows that looked out on the snow-covered grounds. "Thank you," Elena whispered once they were out of earshot. "He would have—" She stopped, unable to continue. "I know," Isolde said gently. "Are you hurt?" Elena shook her head. "Not yet, but he'll punish me later when we're alone." Isolde felt a surge of anger on the girl's behalf. "Because you refused to let him feed." "Because I refused to let him feed in public," Elena clarified. "It's humiliating to be displayed like that, like I'm nothing but a cup to be drained." "You're not," Isolde said firmly. "You're a person with dignity and rights." Eleanor's laugh was brittle. "Rights? In the vampire court? You must be very new." "I am," Isolde admitted, "but that doesn't make it right what he's doing." "Right has nothing to do with it," Eleanor said, resignation heavy in her voice. "We're property, Lady Isolde. The binding makes it so. The best we can hope for is a kind master, or a disinterested one." The words struck Isolde like a physical blow. Was that truly all they were? Property to be used or abused according to their master's whims? "Does Prince Cassian treat you well?" Eleanor asked suddenly, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They say he's different, colder, more humane, ironically." Isolde hesitated, aware that anything she said might become court gossip, but the girl's desperate hope deserved something approaching honesty. "He has been correct in his behavior," she said carefully. "He has not harmed me." Eleanor nodded, as if this confirmed something she'd suspected. "You're fortunate, then. Most of us aren't so lucky." Before Isolde could respond, a shadow fell across them. Lord Harrow had returned, his patience evidently exhausted. "Enough chatter," he said sharply. "Eleanor, come." The girl rose immediately, her brief moment of candour replaced by the mask of subservience she'd worn before. But as she turned to follow her lord, she hesitated, then leaned close to Isolde. "Watch for the ones who smile too much," she whispered. "They're the most dangerous." Then she was gone, following Lord Harrow back into the crowd like a ghost trailing its own corpse. Isolde remained in the alcove, her mind racing with the implications of their conversation. She had known abstractly that vampire society was built on power imbalances. Immortal and mortal, master and servant, predator and prey. But seeing it enacted before her, witnessing the casual cruelty with which Lord Harrow treated his bound consort, made the reality viscerally clear, and it raised questions about her own situation. Cassian had been cold, distant, often frustrating, but never cruel, never demanding. He had, in fact, gone out of his way to avoid the very intimacy the binding was designed to create. Why? What made him different from lords like Harrow? And how long would that difference last? She was so lost in thought that she didn't notice Cassian's approach until he spoke. "That was unwise," he said, his voice low and tight with controlled anger. Isolde looked up, startled. "What was?" "Interfering between a lord and his consort," Cassian replied, "publicly questioning his authority, drawing attention to yourself, and by extension, to me." "He was going to hurt her," Isolde said, refusing to back down. "Feed from her against her will in front of everyone." "It is his right," Cassian said, though something in his eyes suggested he didn't entirely believe this. The binding gives him that right. Then the binding is wrong, Isolde retorted, too upset to consider the danger of such a statement in a court full of vampires. No one should have that kind of power over another person. Cassian's eyes widened slightly, and for a moment she thought he might strike her for such heresy. Instead, he stepped closer, lowering his voice until it was barely audible. "Be careful what you say in this place," he warned. "The walls have ears, quite literally in some cases." "I won't apologize for helping her," Isolde said stubbornly. To her surprise, something like pride flickered in his eyes. "I wouldn't expect you to," he said. "But your actions have consequences. Lord Harrow is not without influence, and he has a long memory." "I can handle Lord Harrow," she said with more confidence than she felt. Cassian's mouth quirked in what might have been the ghost of a smile. "Perhaps you can," he conceded. "But there are others at court far more dangerous. Speaking of which, where is Everic?" The question caught her off guard. "I haven't seen him since you left." Cassian's expression tightened. "He's playing some game. He always is." He glanced around the hall, his gaze sharp. "Stay close for the remainder of the evening. My father has called for the midnight toast, after which we may depart without giving offence." "I thought we were expected to remain separate," Isolde said, confused by his change in strategy. "That was before you made yourself a target," he replied. "Now, staying near me is the safest course." As they moved back into the crowd, Isolde felt eyes upon her, more focused than before, more calculating. Her interaction with Eleanor had been noticed, it seemed, and judged by many. Some of the gazes held contempt, others curiosity, and a few, most surprising of all, showed something like respect. One elderly vampire lady even nodded to her as they passed, a gesture that Cassian noted with raised eyebrows. "Lady Wisteria rarely acknowledges anyone," he murmured. "Least of all mortals. You've made an impression." "A good one or a bad one?" Isolde asked. "That," he said, "remains to be seen." They had nearly reached the dais where the king and queen waited when Isolde's attention was caught by a portrait hanging on the wall of a side corridor. Unlike the other artwork that adorned the palace, scenes of battle or hunt, landscapes of impossible beauty, abstracts that hurt the eye to look upon, this was a simple portrait of a woman with dark hair and eyes like molten gold. The same woman Isolde had glimpsed in the enchanted mirror weeks ago, standing behind her reflection as if casting a shadow only magic could perceive. Without thinking, she stepped toward it, drawn by a compulsion she couldn't name. "Isolde!" Cassian called, noticing her divergence. "The toast is about to begin." "Just a moment," she said, approaching the portrait. The woman depicted was beautiful in the way of all vampires, but there was something more, a sadness in her eyes, a tension in her posture, as if she were trapped within the canvas, waiting for release. Isolde reached out, her fingers hovering just above the painted surface. "Don't touch that," Cassian said sharply, suddenly at her side. But it was too late. Her fingertips brushed the canvas. A shock of cold raced up her arm. The woman's eyes seemed to focus on her, the painted mouth curving in a smile that hadn't been there a moment before. And in her mind, clear as if spoken aloud, Isolde heard a voice. "So, you're the one he chose to replace me." Then the moment passed, the painting returning to its original state, the voice fading like mist under sun. Isolde stepped back, her heart racing. "Who is she?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Cassian's face had gone carefully blank, but his eyes burned with an emotion she couldn't name. Anger, perhaps, or fear. "No one," he said. "A forgotten noble from a forgotten time. Come, the toast." He took her arm with more force than necessary, practically dragging her away from the portrait, but Isolde couldn't forget what she'd seen, what she'd felt. The woman in the painting was not forgotten. Not by Cassian, certainly. And as they reached the dais, As King Renatus raised his goblet of what could only be blood to toast the assembled court, as Cassian's hand tightened on her arm in warning or protection, or perhaps both, Isolde knew with bone-deep certainty that she'd just encountered the answer to the question he'd refused to answer. There had been another before her, another bride, another binding, and somehow, against all logic, against all the laws of mortality, that bride still lingered in the shadows of Valenhart Castle, watching, waiting, perhaps even planning. The question was, for what?